Here on The Colour of Country Life, it's good to be catching up again with the candidate for Grey for United Australia Party, Suzanne Waters. How are you going, Suzanne?
Good, thanks, Ricky. Thanks for having me on today.
Not a problem. You've been out and about in the electorate. We notice as well there's some enthusiasm with some posters on cars and things like that. How do you feel the campaign's going?
Really, really good. I think we're out there to give people a viable third option. A lot of people have disillusioned with the major parties and they think there's no way out of it, but we're here to tell them that with 151 candidates, we can be that third option and we can actually be a government in our own right. We can hold majority governance.
All right, well, there's a few things to happen before that might happen. When it comes to policy, you've got this good policy we've noticed about helping people, I guess, get a bit more of their income tax back if they choose to live in regional Australia.
Absolutely. So we have the tyranny of distance in regions and the added cost of freight, etc. out here. So, and also to encourage more people out to the regions and decentralise the city, we'll offer 20% less tax for those people, for businesses and individuals living more than 200 kilometres from a capital city. But in my region, I would push for that to be the entire electorate of Grey.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. I think most of Grey's that far from Adelaide, maybe some close to the city is.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much everyone's probably 3 times that far from Adelaide.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's, to be clear, that's people keeping money in their own pocket. I guess it's a rebate from the tax office because they live in a regional area.
Yeah, and paying less. So if that money's come out when you pay wages and your boss takes the money out, you'll get that extra money back.
Oh, so even through a PAYG, you'd actually just not be taxed that much in the first place.
So that's right. Reduce your tax down.
Right.
And then also to return money to the regions, because my gripe always was living out west where we are, we get very little services out there, and in fact they deplete them every year. So and there's a vast amount of money raised through agricultural, fishing, mining out in the region. So we've pledged to return a minimum of 25% of that money to the regions. So it will actually bring growth and jobs and prosperity to the regions and bring businesses back to the regions with downstream processing with the ore-rich areas in Western Australia and Queensland, rather than that ore being processed overseas, process it here in the southern states. So it creates jobs and growth in the southern states, and it'll just bring more people out. And with the incentive of the less tax into the regions, we shouldn't have any problem getting people to shift out here and take up those jobs.
So that 25% you're talking about, that would be not just from, say, mining royalties, but any income tax revenue that comes from those companies, to the government, that would come back and be spent back in the regions. Absolutely,
because at the moment we get very little spent out there, and it's all spent, it's like metro-centric, we always think. It's always dominated in the metropolitan areas with services over there, new basketball stadiums, new trains, trams, roadways. Yes, they do benefit the wider community with the freeways and stuff they put in, but we actually need stuff out where we live. We need more services. We need money towards health and doctors. So although we've pledged $40 billion to health, that will be directly accessible to the hospitals rather than it sifted through the upper echelons of health and very little makes it onto the ground. So then people can, in those hospital situations, they can purchase what's needed for the hospitals, update equipment, and use that to fund getting people that they need, specialists that they need to come out to the regions.
Now, that's a broader United Australia Party policy. Have you made commitments during the campaign specific to, hospitals or other health services in Grey itself?
Yes, so that's what it is. It's $40 billion to health, but directly accessible by the hospitals, so the hospitals can come and access it. And like me, I work in health, or have been in health for 15 years as an AMBO, and often we would get the call that, okay, the CT's down in Whyalla, or this piece of equipment isn't working in another hospital. It's like, let's restructure this so we have these services here in the regions, and we're not required to transfer every single person to Adelaide because we don't have what's needed out here. Because at the moment, like the RA's bursting at the seams, they've got all sorts of issues with overcrowding over there. So let's decentralise that as well, because a few years ago at a surgeon's mortality conference, we were discussing, we actually used Cummins Hospital as an example, and it showed what was available at Cummins Hospital many years ago, which was everything from caesarean births to appendectomies, etc. But now it's almost nothing that's allowed to be done there. So they've de-skilled the country labour force with what the words of the doctor. He said, we've de-skilled our country labour force and everyone has to transfer to the centre of excellence, which is Adelaide, and that's just overcrowding Adelaide. So let's make sure we've got the equipment and the services out here in the region so we can continue to improve and supply what's needed out here and not have to send everyone to the city.
Now, Suzanne, you speak well on health. You've got experience in that area, but you mentioned energy policy earlier, or certainly the mining when it comes to revenues coming back to the region. Where does the United Australia Party stand on, mining and energy when it comes to resources and the whole debate about climate change? Maybe, coal, for instance, there's concerns from the climate lobby that we shouldn't be mining coal.
Okay, so if you went to Queensland and said we're going to cut out coal, you would have a complete riot on your hands. But when they trot down to Melbourne and say we're going to cut out coal, everyone loves you. At the end of the day, climate change has been weaponised into a fear campaign. Over the years, they said the polar ice caps will have melted by 2000, et cetera, et cetera. None of these things have happened. Their push to bring in $1.60 per kilo tax on free-range cattle will literally cripple the agricultural industry in Australia. So the push for 75% reduction in emissions will end up a 75% reduction in farmers. We need to focus on the fact that most farmers and fishers in a whole and miners are good stewards of the land. Now, so they take care of what they have.
You mentioned the climate change and I guess your position on it. The conversation we've had with Liz Haberman, the Independent, who just says it's a coincidence she's running with teal posters. There's been all this concern about teal independents who support climate change. She's told us that she actually approached the Climate 200 group for financial backing for her campaign and says climate change is her number one concern. Is the United Australia Party's number one concern in this election in the seat of Grey about climate change?
No, our number one concern is food and fuel security. So while we continue to trot out the reduction in emissions, you're going to destroy farming. And farming is literally the lifeblood of this country. Without farmers, without fishermen, without agriculture and mining, nobody else exists. So you need to support these people and make sure we have food security and keep what agricultural land we have for food production, and also return refining to Australia. So we are solely self-sufficient and not relying on our fuel coming in from overseas, that if they shut it down in a heartbeat, we don't have anything here.
Now you mentioned...
Without diesel, this country will literally grind to a halt. So if those diesel tankers aren't coming in, we don't have anything over here. So, climate change, it's fine. People in the cities say, I'll put up solar panels. That's great. Good with solar panels. I'm good with that. But when you want to start taxing farmers, say $1.60 per kilo for your free-range cattle, you will totally decimate the agricultural industry. And for what? Australia, what we emit in a year is less than what China emits in a day or two. So while we're virtue signalling saying we're going to cut emissions down to 75% or we're going to go to net zero, you will actually destroy our country.
Now, you mentioned prime farming land. A conversation we've been having on Flow with the candidates is about storing spent nuclear fuel, or I guess more so what's used at Lucas Heights for medical purposes. They're running out of space there. There's been this whole debate about storing it at Kimba. Where do you stand on this storage proposal for Kimba?
So, as I said before, food security is our number one priority. So agricultural land shouldn't be used for something like this that can be facilitated elsewhere. There are other places that have been discussed. I believe Western Australia has an option over there and other places, but don't take valuable agricultural land that's used for food production for something like this.
Yeah, so basically your proposition is not in Grey is where you'd say this should be stored, is somewhere else in the country?
Not in agricultural land. So we've got vast areas north and other places. I mean, we mine uranium at Olympic Dam. So let's look at other options rather than saying we're going to put it smack bang in the middle of prime agricultural land.
So I guess you'd be open to it possibly being stored elsewhere in Grey, further to the north in the outback perhaps?
Possibly, if that's an option. But you'd have to do viable studies, geographical studies and environmental impact studies to see what impact it will have on that environment. And let's discuss it as a whole for Australia, not just say, okay, we're just going to plonk it here in Kimba.
All right,
because we need to study and see what's best for all of Australia.
Suzanne, just occurs to me, with polling actually open for pre-poll and postals, you'd have some how-to-vote cards, I gather, being circulated in the electorate. What is your indication to voters in terms of who they should preference in your seat?
So we've actually said put UAP first, obviously, so put one next to Suzanne Waters. Our party policy was to put the other freedom parties above the majors, so that's what we've done. There's been Federation Party, One Nation and Liberal Democrats, so put them in whatever order you believe after my name. And then we've gone with the majors and the independents, because I feel, reading through the independents, what they stand for, most of them seem to be going down the Labor-Green agenda, which is no good for regional Australia.
So, sorry, just to be clear, Liz Haberman must be last then on your ticket.
I haven't put her last, but if people choose to do that, I would put the independents down with Labor and the Greens.
All right. Thank you very much for talking with us today, Suzanne. Much appreciated, and all the best for the 21st of May.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ricky.